my God, I feel like you guys should like come closer. Like, why you're so far?
Come closer.
You don't have to. It's just trying to break the ice.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 9th annual Startup Boston Week. Woo! Our mission with this conference is simple: to bring together the entire startup community across every industry, department, and funding stage. Startup Boston exists to connect, educate, and celebrate this ecosystem while serving as a trusted, unbiased guide to the best resources that can help you start and scale your startup or your team. My name's Kai. I'll be your host for today. But before we dive in, I first want to give a huge thank you to Suffolk University for hosting this conference. They have hosted us for the past few years, and for that we are very grateful. If you're interested in exploring entrepreneurship, they offer a variety of programs and opportunities. So if that's something interesting to you, be sure to check out their table outside after the panel to learn how they can support your journey, or if you're interested, how you might support their own entrepreneurial students. Today, we have, of course, a very, very interesting panel. And I'm sure throughout it, you're going to have lots and lots of questions. One thing I will ask is that we will have, if you keep them, we will have a Q&A toward the end of it. And then, please raise your hand. We will come to you with a mic, and you can have your little diva moment. Otherwise, thank you so much again for attending Startup Boston Week. Now, on to our session.
Awesome. Thank you guys for coming to a very important conversation. I know it's the end of the day at 5:30 on long startup week, but we appreciate you guys joining us. My name is Stanley Rameau, founder and CEO of Renovest. At Renovest, we actually connect financial therapists, which is the intersection of financial planning and therapeutic practices, to companies to provide it for their employees to heal their relationship with money. And we have an amazing group of panelists here today for an important conversation, DEI in the Crosshairs. Obviously, with the presidential election and everything that's happened this year, a lot has changed, right? And so we don't want this type of conversation to go under the table, but we have some amazing experts who feel passionate in regards to how DEI has changed within this past year and how it's impacted all of us. And really excited to hear their experiences, but how they've been also combating this as well. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves before we get started. Kick it off to my good friend, Sam.
Hi, everybody. Ooh, I'm a little close. My name is Sam Garcia. I'm originally from the South Bronx. I've been living in Boston for around 5 years, and I run the social impact program alongside my manager, Kat, at the Cambridge Innovation Center. The Cambridge Innovation Center is a co-working space, but we got a grant from the Minority Business Development Agency to run a accelerator program for underrepresented founders. So we support them in 3- and 6-month programs for early and growth stage founders. And we're really based in trying to dismantle barriers for entry for underrepresented founders that are based in Mass. So happy to be here.
I'm just trying to test how loud I should talk. Hi, everyone. My name is Paris Chandler. I'm founder and CEO of Black Tech Pipeline, which is a job board, newsletter, and recruiting platform helping companies hire and retain Black tech talent.
Thanks, and thank you for inviting me. I'm Jeff Siegel. I'm a partner at Morgan Brown & Joy. We represent employers in all aspects of human resources, employment law, and the employers can be, startups to large companies. And so I'm happy to be here, and I will try not to say you can't do that more than a set number of times throughout the course of the day. So thanks for having me.
Awesome, and thank you all for being here today. So to kick it off, let's backtrack to November 2024 when we all found out that President Trump was going to be elected. Won't speak on, particular views there, but when it comes to DEI specifically for corporations, I think we all knew that things would change. We've seen companies scale back pretty quickly in regards to their particular efforts. Companies such as Google, Facebook, Target, in which Target was, grossly impacted in regards to its consumers and how they felt about it. But we also seen companies also took a stand and also continue to support their efforts despite regulatory or political pressure, companies like Apple. So we do want to talk about how does that impact startups and early stage companies specifically. And I want to kick it off with Sam, who is the program manager of CIC, who does an amazing job, and I've had the pleasure in working with her and her startups. But when you ended up finding out the changes, and this was right when I think your program ended up starting, how did that impact, how your founders felt, them being underrepresented, how they were going to move forward, and then as a program leader, leading initiatives and, keeping that optimism of growth and scale, how did your team also support and impact that as well?
Yeah, no, that's an amazing question. I think we're very candid. We work with the federal government, and working with the federal government has its pros and its cons. One of the biggest cons is reporting and having to be super precise on the things that you're reporting. So like numbers, who was there, how many times were they there, how many hours did we provide programming for them, and in that, when we saw an administration shift, we saw a huge shift in the type of language that we could use. We also saw a huge shift in the types of resources that we could provide to people. So a lot of our program, I build a lot of the curriculum to encompass DEI, and I build a lot of the curriculum to have people reflect the experiences of the founders that are there. So being told that I might have to tweak the language that I'm using when I'm speaking to people about programming is not something that sits right with me professionally, but also personally. So I think, one, having to sit with our founders and communicate that, hey, like our funding got paused, I don't really know what that means right now, and you're in a state of uncertainty, so you have to kind of like drive in with a poker face, like, like I might not have a job by the end of this month, but I have to still keep providing people a level of service because they're relying on me to basically not only give them access to certain resources or network, but also just be a sounding board. And when you're facilitating a program, if people see you discouraged, they automatically become discouraged. If you're working, I've worked with youth for many years, and when you're in a bad mood, young people are in a bad mood. And it's the same thing when you're working with people intergenerationally. When you're in a bad mood, they're gonna be in a bad mood, most likely too. And if you're not really keeping up morale and keeping the energy of the group, it's seen in the way that you're facilitating, the way that you're speaking to them, communicating. So one thing that we did try to do is always like just address things very candidly, and even within like my team and across other teams at CIC, just be like, okay, like what are we gonna do if we don't have funding, and how are we gonna move forward? And just because we don't have capital, it doesn't mean that this should stop being a movement, because we clearly see a gap here. There's data that shows that underrepresented founders make up a very small percentage of founders that are actually given capital through VCs, through grants. So how do we keep driving that forward without losing morale? And then also just telling people like, yo, I understand if what we're doing and how we're partnered with the government isn't necessarily aligned with you in terms of the uncertainty, because if you're working with me, it's like a thing of like, let's sign a contract, I'll pay you for this. But now if I'm not getting funded by the government, it's like, I might not be able to pay you. Are you still willing to provide services? And those are very candid, hard conversations you have to have with people. But I think because I sit with a lot of transparency in the role that I do, I hope and I only bring on people that can also have those hard conversations as well. So.
Amazing. And then you mentioned and touched on a great point when it comes to language, and we're going to deep dive more into that and how language and strategies shifted, or DEI specifically. But I want to go to Paris and Jeffrey next. First impressions, take yourself back to November. In your particular roles, what was the first impressions and how you felt DEI might impact the work that you do?
I mean, it impacted my work exactly as I expected it to. So because we work in hiring and recruitment, and then we also serve Black tech talent. And those two things combined, we took a hit with, just the job market in particular, like just kind of going down, especially in tech with lots of layoffs. So that's one place we're getting hit. And then we serve Black tech talent, and now, there's all these DEI, regulations are getting cut, and it's just seen as such a bad thing. And so we have hiring partners no longer working with us and not saying directly like, hey, we're going to follow the federal government and, not support DEI. But, having worked with us for years and then all of a sudden, like now, like, yeah, we're not going to be working with you now. It brings things into question. And then there's like the threats that we just get from people online who are constantly saying they're going to report us to the government and get us shut down. And what we're doing is racist and discriminate. There's all these complaints about discrimination. Regardless of how much I explain like why the work we do is important and how we are not outcasting anyone. So, and those are things I've kind of dealt with ever since I launched Black Tech Pipeline. It's just like there's an uptick now in these things.
Yeah, well, my response was sort of one word and began with F, but that's a personal issue. So I represent companies. So I'm on the phone all day long with HR professionals, with founders, business owners, and I think at first there was a shock, and it was like, okay, let's see what's going to happen. But I think after that, from my perspective, to echo some of the things we've heard up here, there was, okay, like, what do we do? Like, how do we navigate this, and how do we navigate this in a way that is both consistent with the moral code and the culture that we've developed at this organization, and also do it in a way that's fiscally responsible, right? And those are not always drivers that are going in the same direction. So it was, and I don't think the uncertainty has gone away, right? I mean, if anything, it continues to be sort of a shifting landscape, but it's been really trying to address the anxiety from a corporate side, and I know that sort of sounds funny to actually say as a thing, but to address sort of, okay, how do we navigate this? Because every company has a different culture, right? Every startup that I've worked with has different goals and different personalities, and some people, say, I don't care what they say, I'm going to do this, and others say, well, what is the law? I want to follow it to the letter, and then there were people sort of in between, and so it was sort of managing that, the unknown of that, which took up a lot of time and energy and sleepless nights.
Absolutely. And so all great points. And so I want to, again, double down on language and strategy frameworks. From my own experience, I was also in an accelerator during the time in November where I was working with angel investors, angel groups specifically, and getting, great advice from them. But it was all angel investors, all white angel investors, older and probably 15 plus. And as soon as things shifted in my pitch deck, anything that said underrepresented or any focus to any particular groups, they're like, take that out immediately. Like, this is not even going to be a thing, not going to be a department. And so through my experience, seeing that there was different shifts in which actually DEI was still something that was there that companies was focusing on, but language did change, right, to make it more inclusive. And so with that being said, Jeff, can you even speak more in regards to what advice you give for founders or what you hear from HR teams on how they are navigating the language aspects of things to make things, be, I guess, more inclusive? Yeah,
and it's, I don't know, it's somewhere between Orwellian and creepy, right, to try to pick different words if people want to achieve their goals. To take a step back and to be sort of the boring lawyer for a minute, because that's who I am, there are employment laws, right, that govern, right, and it says you can't discriminate. Some of these employment laws don't apply to small companies, right? So, if you have fewer than 6 employees, then these laws don't apply and you have a little bit more free reign, which historically has been a negative, but at least in this context is a positive if we want to have more aggressive policies. In federal law, it's a little bit larger, 15 or 20. And so, some of the smaller companies were just like, we're going to do whatever we want because these laws don't apply to us. We're going to kind of sail under the radar and, let's do what we believe is right. But that said, there are some sort of bright line rules that have emerged. And what I'm talking about is some combination of all of the executive orders that have come out, most of which there's no authority for, but they still come out and they're designed to sort of shock and awe, and I think that's what they're doing. Yeah. And then they get challenged in the courts with some degree of success depending on where in the country you're challenging them. As I think I said in one of our pre-meetings, living in sort of the blue bubble up here, it gives us the feeling of protection for some of these things. I have clients in other parts of the country that are reacting in a much different way than my clients who are in the greater Boston area. But some of these executive orders and some of these rules, the baseline is you can't discriminate. And that means based on any color, based on any protected class, whether majority or minority. And that's been sort of twisted over time, in these executive orders. But what we've come out at is no quotas, right? I mean, just to kind of lay it out there, like just no quotas. Like if we want to do things, we have to find a different way to talk about, and I think it's hard, and you guys are on the front lines of it. It's hard to figure out where you're having success if you don't quantify it. But ultimately, you can't have quotas. I mean, that is pretty simple. And that quota, it goes to number of board seats, right, that are reserved for certain community members, or available opportunities for training or advancement. That seems to be where the focus of the governmental intrusion is. And it also seems to be the focus of where this is being recorded, so I have to clean up some language, where the personally offended white person will bring a claim, right? Like they're become emboldened, frankly, and there's an uptick in that. And it's going to be the quota, and it's going to be opportunities that are on their face exclusionary, which tend to sort of get caught in the wind.
Yeah, all great points. And Paris, you've been running your business for 5 years. As a founder, did you feel like it was necessary to do any language changes or framing strategies, especially focusing on, Black individuals who are looking to, break into the tech space?
Yeah, I did change language on my website, and but I also did more sort of like explaining, as in like, although we center, Black technologists, like we are a platform that anyone can use. We're just, centering a very vulnerable community. And I just find myself sort of over explaining all the time, whether it's on my website, whether it's on social media, emails, people trying to harass me through my contact page. Like it's just constant over explanation. But yeah, I think I removed sort of like DEI, and I'm now using things like inclusivity and, just things that are more accepted. And the thing is, like, it's accepted until it's not, because who knows, something else might change once again. And you have to find your way around that. So I'm trying to keep up as much as I can.
Yeah. And I mean, especially laying the groundworks for 5 years, you don't want to shift, from a mission standpoint. But, sometimes it requires, a little bit of flexibility. And Jeff, you mentioned a great point as far as bigger companies have to focus on, a lot of this more so than smaller companies. So Sam, as far as, the founders that you was working with, they're all early stage. Did you guys throughout the program encourage any type of language or strategy frameworks around this, knowing that it might come up?
Yeah, so again, me personally, no, but professionally, I think there were a lot of times where in our curriculum, we have a lot of financial sessions where we talk about like different types of grants you can apply to. And one of the sessions, one of the founders actually was there, and he's sitting right there, Jeremy. And we were talking about SBIR and STTR grants, which are technical grants that the federal government gives out and different agencies the federal government gives out. And we have a grant writer, she's amazing, but she's talking about a lot of these technical terms. And at the end, we're going through a Q&A, and a lot of our founders are just like, hey, so like I just applied to this grant. So like, and this was like March, I believe, of this past year, while the administration was actively changing all these things and these regulations to these grants. They're just like, so I just applied for this grant. So like, what do I do? And grant writer was like, well, did you hear back? And they're just like, no. Did you get a notice of when you hear back? No. So there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of like, even the guidelines that you can give people, even experienced professionals now, grant writers are not knowing, and I used to write grants for nonprofits, so a lot of it is really like like Paris said, like over-explaining yourself and over-explaining yourself to a point where you just become exhausted even having the conversations with people in real time, because you realize that there's not a gap in understanding. There's a gap in wanting to comprehend me and wanting to have empathy for me and what I'm building for other people that's going to benefit other people. So a lot of the times, like, there was, to be honest with you, there were a lot of moments where we'd just be like, you know what, let's come back to that. We're gonna like circle back and see what we can actually give you. And then another part of me still holistically believes that you do need to push back. So it was even like having conversations like with my own team being like, well, we can't necessarily, us accepting, for example, a white man that has built a bunch of companies and has been super successful and has all the resources, is very known in the startup community, is very different from a Black woman coming in and it's her first time building out a startup, right? So how do you assess them even on like an application basis, right? When we're accepting applicants into our program, now it's like we have other criteria of like, be written into like our interviews and our application, like what are experiences that you have not had as a founder? What are certain, like, have you had access to other programs, and what were those programs like, and how were they built, and how did they not meet your goals? And that's kind of like an example of ways that we've had to like tweak certain language to maintain like good standing with grants, but also like maintain good standing with people that you don't even know are watching. When you're working with a federal entity, you don't really know who's paying attention to the things that you're doing. So a lot of it is like, you know what, how can I am going to over explain myself. I'm going to write this longer. The application is now going to be 5 pages. And unfortunately, everybody's going to have to go through it. But I think that all in all, there does need to be a sense of pushback that happens, and more so from facilitators rather than the founders themselves. Founders already have a risk in being a founder. You're already risking everything, working full-time on your venture. You need people that are going to be willing to kind of like risk it all and say whatever it is to get the point across that you need. So yeah.
Yeah. And that last point, as far as evaluating, particular individuals for a program, obviously can be really difficult, especially from a mission statement or just the type of individuals that you want to be supporting, but experience might shift. I think it also resonates with Jeffrey's point as far as larger companies having to avoid meeting a quota, especially when it comes to, DEI particular efforts. And so we had a really good conversation earlier when we was preparing for this panel as far as how founders can be able to build inclusive cultures, environments, teams, from the start, right, when it comes to, their first few hires. So, Sam, if you can probably, kick it off, and then we'll go to Jeffrey as next, as far as how can founders, build inclusive cultures from the beginning, but then also taking in consideration, talent, who's the best person for the job.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Lead with curiosity. I think that's something that I tell the founders that I work with, and also anybody that I work with. If you've had a conversation with me, you'll probably hear me say that. But leading with curiosity is one of the best things you could do, because you don't know what you don't know. And you never really know. I think a lot of what's going on in this world is not only just like systemic, but just like everybody is now on the basis of misunderstanding each other. And I think that it really just takes a lot of, because I think we all live with implicit bias through our experiences. And I think that building a successful company culture is being able to sit with people that make you question, like, what are you building? They ask you hard questions and they challenge you to think about, like, is that actually inclusive though? Is that actually accessible though? I work on the side, I also work as a creative consultant, and when I'm working with artists, sometimes a lot of the questions that I ask them is like, well, is this event that you're building accessible to people? Like, are they able, just because you can walk up this ramp doesn't mean that every single person can come up this ramp like the same way, right? And you have to have people that make you have those hard conversations that kind of push you outside of your comfort zone, because discomfort is something that will allow your team to grow and expand in ways that you didn't imagine, while also challenging your current beliefs and like how you work with people. Obviously, keeping a standard of like how you want to expand and having like a mission statement that you can grow on. But I think that mission statements for teams only work if it's a collective decision. It's a collective statement. You can't make a mission statement yourself and think that everybody on your team is going to be on the same page about what you're building and what you're trying to do. So everything has to be homegrown. Everything has to be a collective decision. I'm a huge fan of like co-ops and cooperatives, and I always like talk a lot about them because I think that they exemplify a great way of how people can come together. And it's a lengthy process, but they can make a decision that ultimately benefits all of them and everybody else that they're working with.
Amazing points. Jeff, can you piggyback, especially with the founders that, you speak with, if they are on an early stage, how do you go about, communicating about creating inclusive cultures?
Yeah, well, first I'm going to steal half of what Sam said.
That was a really great point.
That was more eloquent than anything I've ever said. I think every founder is different, is sort of is my view. The founders I tend to work with and the startups I tend to work with are somewhere between, themselves and a handful of employees, right? And what I found is over time, that first sort of grouping of employees are people who are trusted, right? And so, at least from my perspective, and maybe it's because of the wonderful work everyone else is doing, the DEI culture piece doesn't necessarily come in at that first grouping, because it's people who are trusted, it's people who believe in the cause, in the mission. It's where I sort of come in and end up talking to the founders a lot is in the second and third generation meaning the second and third round of hires, the people who are sort of getting there after the thing is established and beginning to gain a little bit of momentum. And I think, the best advice I can give them, again, I'm going to piggyback on what you said, is you got to do what you think is right? And the nice thing about being a startup, and particularly if we're up here, is a lot of these things will just fly under the radar, to be blunt. And I'm talking about private organizations. If you're working with the federal government, that's a whole different set of wonderful experiences. But if you're privately funded, you are just, you're trying to keep, for the founders, they're keeping the company afloat and they're trying to get to revenue or wherever they're trying to get to launch whatever they're trying to get to. And so, as I said earlier, some of the founders that I work with are, I'm going to do this. I don't care. I'm like, this is what I want to do. And I'm like, great. My job as a lawyer isn't to tell you what to do. It's to say, if you do this, these are the risks, right? And if you do this, this might happen. And so, we try to coach them around sort of the things that are most likely to get caught in the net, is how I described it. But other than that, it is, the founders are the ones out there taking the risk, right? I became a lawyer because I don't have that risk gene in me, right? And I recognize that. And I compliment people because they have that ability, as the people up here do. But it's, it's to trust that sort of instinct and to work with it. And let's just keep things out of the spotlight is sort of how I view that part of the role.
Awesome. And Paris, can you share even maybe some positive experiences or optimism that you've experienced this year of companies that have, stuck to, company culture that may have been, focusing on, DEI efforts and have doubled down on that?
Yeah. So I am still working with a few companies that they're sticking to their commitment. They're sticking to their commitment. They're just being more quiet about it, and that's strategic, which I totally understand. And I don't know like every company, but I do like hearing when companies are like, yeah, we're gonna do it, and if we're challenged, then we'll go in the ring. We don't care, and that's great to hear. And I think it's really important for companies, like based on where you are, like here in Boston, if you don't need to let go of DEI, if you don't need to re-strategize, then I don't think you should, right? Until you absolutely have to. And I want more companies to put up that fight. I think it's really important.
Awesome. And can you also even speak on companies that, lost my train of thought. It was a good question too. That ambiguity in regards to companies that are getting a lot more quiet about their particular efforts. Does it make it more difficult to, find opportunities, for, your particular clients because they're becoming a lot more quiet in these particular efforts? And how does that change or switch your strategy?
So there are companies who I've worked with who they don't want me to. So what I do is when they post their jobs on my job board, I advertise those jobs through my newsletter, through my socials, and they'll tell me to stay away from certain platforms because it's more risky to be seen there partnering with a company like mine. And so I just won't post there for them specifically. So it's almost like I have to customize the way I work with every company now. And I want to be able to work with them so that we can stay partners and I can still supply opportunity to my community members. So kind of just going with the flow, honestly.
Absolutely. Want to speak more in regards to the reality for startups operating, especially from a fundraising standpoint. So, Sam, I know you probably have a lot of experience as far as your startups experience with that, especially around DEI, and maybe Jeffrey, you might have experience in regards to those conversations as well. But Sam, can you speak on the fundraising environment and how that might have impacted how individuals invest in founders of color?
It was bad already. It's even worse now. No, but to be serious, I think that now it's about, I work with most of the companies that enter our program. We're not social impact exclusive at our accelerator, but it happens to be that every single company that applies and is accepted is a social impact company. And it has been super interesting from the time I started back in January of 2024 to now being at CIC for almost 2 years, the types of conversations we've had with investors and the types of conversations I've had to have with them. And I think that I've done a really good job, and I'm gonna toot my own horn. I've done a really good job at creating certain events that are designed to put investors in the hot seat and really talk about their due diligence, talk about their process of investing, to talk to founders about what it looks like to invest with them. Because I think a lot of the times we ask founders to pitch so much that we never sit down and actually think about like, wait, but the investor is really working for the founder half the time. Like, so what are they actually doing that's benefiting the founder? So we've seen a lot of folks ask us, like, ask us that same question. How are we maintaining, our standards as a social impact program, for folks that maybe are seeing less capital as the years go on with this kind of administration? And I think that you have to be willing to still step into spaces that do not see a lot of people like us. You have to be willing to try to cold call those investors on behalf of the founders that you're working with. There's a lot of times where I do not get a response back from 50% of the investors we reach out to talk to our companies. But for the 5 no's that I get a couple of yeses, and those people are worthwhile in terms of the relationships that they maintain with the founders, the types of resources that they bring on for the founders that we work with. I think that I wouldn't trade the small group. And it may seem small in retrospect, but I think that it's grown exponentially from the time we started to now. The types of investors that are always just like, hey, like, send us your company portfolio. Like, we'd love to speak to them. Like, is there anything that we can do, any resources that we could provide? We'd love to come back to your investor reverse pitch. That's the event that I was talking about, where the investors end up pitching to founders. But I think that just shows, like, there are people that are willing to kind of work through the weeds of everything that's going on to actually, like, create a foundation for founders, especially underrepresented founders, to be successful and sustain their businesses long term. Because I think the worst thing, exits are not bad, endings are not bad, but I think the worst thing is seeing a founder put in so much work and their turnaround is nothing. So I think that it's been super challenging, but as I said before, I'm willing to kind of take the risk, and what that looks like is different every single day. So we're starting a program next week, so we'll see what that looks like.
Absolutely. And Jeff, in your experience, have you seen how DEI might have impact fundraising experiences at all? Any points?
Yeah, I think the majority of my experience is hearing it from the founders,
Yeah.
right, as opposed to hearing it from the investors. And I don't, actually, I don't have sort of a through line on it, because I do think it is really company specific. And I would love for there to be some consistency in a positive way, but it really is, the founders on the phone saying, hey, I can't be sued for this, right? Like if I'm in the news for this and if I'm sued for this, I'm going to lose my funding and it's going to be a whole big problem. And so I get that, and then I also get I talked to I talked to the people who are holding the money, and they said, I can do this, and we can take this risk. Great, So, I don't think it's anything sort of beyond that. What ends up happening, frankly, is every time there's something in the news, like I'll get a couple of calls because the fear and the uncertainty trickles down, either an executive order or a court staying something or not staying something. Particularly in those companies that I work with that are connected in some way to universities, right? Over the last 6 months, anyone who's getting funding through a university program or partnering with a university program saw that spigot stop, particularly around here, and so that caused some stress. But that's a little bit different than your question, I recognize.
Yeah, well, actually, let's stay on that in regards to legal risks, the fears, and how that differs from startup reality. We kind of talked about, even in our previous call, around how startups in red states rarely, ask about DEI, but while in Massachusetts, you might see it as a core value. Paris mentioned a great point as far as companies in Boston specifically, that shouldn't be, a huge worry. So what is the, real legal risk versus what's reality is for startups, and what type of legal risk should, founders be focusing on right now and probably put to the wayside?
I hear legal risk.
And that's
Yeah, so, on one hand, I can hold up the Pam Bondi Department of Justice, this is everything you can't do, and on the other hand, I can hold up, we had 16 blue states as attorneys general who said, you can still do, DEI, you can still promote diversity. We don't think that's unlawful, and we don't think it's a bad thing. And so how do you sort of reconcile that? I think that, first of all, the way I frame it for my clients is legal risk is just one of the risks you're facing here, right? If you do or don't do something, you're also going to have operational risk, right? You're also going to have reputational risk, right? You're also going to have recruiting risk, right? If you, stop doing the things that bring the people you want into your organization, those people are going to stop coming, right? And that's sort of a practical reality. But I do think, as I mentioned before, there's a lot more focus and belief that you can do more in the Northeast, than there is in other parts of the country. I've had clients in the Midwest that are frankly just ended their entire programs because their attorneys general were not one of the 16 that signed on, right? And they were just like, it's too risky for me. It's too rich for my blood, and that was it. But in terms of what the startups are looking for, at the risk of repeating myself, it really is anything that is tangible and anything that is out in front as exclusionary. Those are the things that are going to catch the attention of whether it's the individual plaintiff who's suing or some governmental agency. And in Massachusetts, frankly, it's not going to be the Attorney General, and it's not going to be the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. Like, they are not coming after you for anything. You can do whatever you want, as if it were 5 years ago, because this isn't part of their goals. But it is going to be the EEOC. It is going to be the Department of Labor. Hopefully, it's not the Department of Justice, but I mean, that's another one that's on that list. And so, I counsel clients, we talked a little bit about word choice, right? As silly / depressing, unsettling as that is, you got to change the words, right? If you don't want to get caught in, somebody or some AI looking at the website or looking at grants, change words. I'll give you an example. the American Bar Association used to have a program where they put aside X number of seats on the board for underrepresented communities, members of underrepresented communities. They were sued, right, by a group of red-stated attorneys general. What they have done to address it is, we're not going to have those 5 seats that were for members of the underrepresented community. We're going to have people who are committed to the ideals associated with, right? I'm a lawyer. I work with words all day. There's no difference there, right? At least I hope there's no difference. I don't know what the difference is, but those word choices have satisfied those litigants, and they've been able to settle it. You know, whether it makes a change in the outcome, we'll find out, but those are the risks that we're seeing and trying to address.
Absolutely. And does those particular risks you mentioned, especially as soon as like a founder hears something from the news and so forth, what is that kind of like impact where it's like at a 10 they're like shocked, and what is your experience in bringing them back down to like, okay, this is really a 3, it has nothing to do with you, and we don't have to keep having these conversations type of.
Yeah, I mean, that's my job, right?
Right.
Sometimes it's law, and sometimes it's social work, and sometimes it's somewhere in between. But I do think that the founders have to be comfortable with the decision, right? Ultimately, and we can help them because we're advising them. Okay, when you interview people, like, let's choose neutral questions, right? Let's get a panel of people to interview people, and not have individuals who might bring their own viewpoints in. But we'll get a group of people to do panel interviews, and we'll set up benchmarks for what we think are going to lead to success. Those kinds of questions. But I mean, in terms of sort of how you talk a founder, you guys would know better than I.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can talk them down from the up above, and sometimes you can't, right?
Right.
But in terms of sort of the overall, if I'm being honest, this part of it is sometimes it is a concern, but it is not as big of a concern as keeping the organization afloat.
Right.
And so we have to sort of keep it in perspective, at least for that.
For sure. In Paris, have you had any experiences with companies based off of, their perception of legal risks, shift how you have worked with them, moving forward?
No, so I've just had, companies kind of just take a step back from my platform, and I don't get a reason why, so I actually don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah. We have about 10 minutes, so we'll go to questions soon. But if you guys have maybe one advice that you would provide, whether Paris yourself, like, some of your clients that are looking for jobs, especially in this difficult market. There's a report that mentioned more individuals are unemployed compared to actual jobs out there, and especially in the tech environment, you would think that wouldn't be as much of the case. But is there any advice from your perspective, Jeff, in your role, and Sam, especially with these new founders, that's coming in on how they can be able to, tackle what DEI might look like, at least within the next 3 years?
I think even regardless if you're in Boston and you don't want to be super public with stating that you have DEI practices, or you're somewhere else and you don't want to do that, I think it's something you should practice regardless. Like DEI, honestly, it's something we wish didn't have to exist, but it does. And so you have to be intentional about it. And so if you want to create a welcoming environment for all, where there's opportunity, where everyone can grow and, get the things they need in order to thrive in your company, you have to create that space, and you have to always check in on those practices that you have and see, where can you do better? Where are people satisfied? Where are people dissatisfied? What can we do better to, make them have a better experience here in this space? Those are things you should be doing from the foundation of your company, and continue to do as you grow. If you are intentional about that, I don't think you have to sit here and maybe worry as much about like, DEI is gone, what am I going to do? Because it's something you should be doing anyway. You're doing it for everyone, and you're being intentional about it. So that's my advice.
Yeah, great point. Great point. And Sam, with the new founders coming into the next program, you already have a year under the belt with the new regulatory experiences that just ended up having. What is kind of like the mindset going into this new group of founders and how to, impact these conversations?
I think now more than ever, something that I didn't mention was like back in like April, our funding did get paused. So we did have a moment of like uncertainty in terms of like what we were going to do. And thankfully, we did have an injunction hearing where we were ruled that we were able to continue, doing everything as normal. But I think now, for any founder that's starting out in our program or is going to be in future programs interested in applying, or if you're starting any accelerator, I think I feel much more prepared to. I always felt prepared, but I feel much more prepared to kind of sit with them in those moments that feel uncomfortable for us both as a facilitator and a founder. And I think, if anything, anytime I go through experiences like that, or I talk to founders that are going through experiences like that, even prior to this administration, because we live in this country where DEI has to exist in order for us to have equitable experiences, unfortunately. Honestly, I think it makes me much more like, all right, what else can I do to disrupt? Who else's table can I sit at and make them question like their entire existence in that moment? And I think that that's like my purpose. I think that any room that I step in, it's not only to connect people, but also to disrupt something that was not meant to have me there in the first place. That's not everybody's role, but I feel like that's my role. So with any accelerator program that we start, I think I just feel kind of refreshed and ready to go. So I'm excited to see what comes out of the next 3 months.
Absolutely, and a heavy helmet that you're built for sure. Jeff, any final advice or for any founders who might be in the room right now?
Yeah,
Just
I
about it.
think prioritizing from a legal perspective, remember, the touchstone is you can't do something because of, right? The because of does all of the work in the law, right? Those are the words. Prioritize wide-scale recruitment efforts, right? Like, find qualified applicants from anywhere you can find them, it would be the advice. And look in places that you wouldn't otherwise look, and in areas where you think, oh, that person is going to bring something to the table and is going to help. The law doesn't prohibit you from hiring the person you want to hire the most, right? And so, and the way you find those people, I think, is to do wide-scale recruitment efforts to bring in applicant pools that all have all sorts of different backgrounds. And I think that's, that has always been the case, and that is even more so the case today.
Amazing. Thank you, Jeffrey, Paris, and Sam. Can you guys give my amazing guests a round of applause before we jump into questions? Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions before we move forward? Yes.
Hi, thank you all. Before I ask my question, this is so effed. I just need to say that, and I just want to say, I just appreciate you all for being here and for the time. I can, tell it's taking a lot out of everybody, and so I just appreciate it. With that being said, so I'm the co-founder of a consulting group called Listen to Your Mothers that focuses on supporting working with employers to better support moms in the workplace to retain and attract them. And I'm curious specifically for Stanley and for Paris, for you all who are, it sounds like, working with employers as well. I've gotten a lot of advice, well, two things. I've gotten a lot of people saying, oh my gosh, that's so important. And at the same time, you need to tell businesses why they should care about this from the economic standpoint. And so I've done that, and there's a lot of data that shows blah, 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 like retention is expensive. And at the same time, the first client that we signed, the biggest client that we just signed, signed with us because they were like, we care about our employees. And so it kind of has made me just think about, should I be spending all my time trying to convince people who, if you don't care about your employees, I don't know how much more I can say or how much data I can give you to say that you should, versus focusing on people who do need the help. And are there enough people out there who do care and want the help, and should I just put my energy towards them? And so I'm just curious, from your perspectives, what is your approach with your own businesses on that front?
Yeah. And I resonate with your experience. We're at Renovest in the sales cycle right now. And so for us, it's just finding that ideal customer profile, exactly what you mentioned, individuals that actually care. So the individuals that are moving the conversations forward are the ones that actually believe in the work that you're doing. We target employee resource groups specifically, and so if that's a avenue that you are where they do have groups, granted right now they are inclusive for everyone to join, but there's probably companies that have, employee resource groups that focus on mothers or of women specifically. And so typically when we target those leaders, we get an idea of what their temperature check with their relationship with benefits managers, because ultimately, they can be the ones that make the decisions, but, they're not the ones that, write the check or say the final decision. And so any efforts in which you can be able to figure out maybe a timeline on how long this might take, because going B2B, there's always a process. And so trying to figure out that framework, but then, staying on top of them and giving them a perspective of like, hey, we really want to kind of get this done, where we're at and, accomplishing that. But I think it's exactly what you mentioned. We stopped wasting time with individuals that we could just tell the energy that they weren't going to move forward with a second or third conversation. So that would be my perspective.
Yeah, so I've had this experience ever since I launched my company 5 years ago. So what I've noticed is that I think like the employees, the workers doing like literally the groundwork of the company and they are not in leadership, they're the ones who truly cared about, partnering with us and hiring Black tech talent. Whereas leadership, they asked me so many questions. It took forever to like gain partnerships because it's leadership who's like, well, where's the business benefit? What are the numbers? What are we going to get back if we invest in this? And so I take that into consideration where I'm like, okay, you know what? I am going to give it the time to like answer these questions, go back and forth, because I know these people at the company really care, even though these people have different priorities. And it ended up being worth it, I think, not every time, but most of the time. And so I think like that's up to you, if you really want to invest so much time in going back and forth with people who may not seem like they're as interested or like they're giving you a hard time, but really find out, who is it that is truly like they need these questions answered? Because maybe part of these people really do care, and the others, they just need that money. They need the money to invest in you, so you take the time to go back and forth.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Thank you guys for doing this again. Really appreciate it. So I work with a social impact company that works with first-generation college students, and we sort of help them build their sort of social capital. And I'm the corporate partnership guy because I spent 20 years in corporate HR. So a lot of what you're talking about resonates, and I'm having fascinating conversations with HR people at corporations, and some will be kind of, I would call it like awkward conversations of what we do is with students that aren't sort of separated by race or color, but it's socioeconomic background. Mm-hmm. And they'll say, well, we could actually work with you. You're sort of a safer alternative than the companies we do work with now that are focused on, whether it's Black talent, Latinx. I'm curious with you, Paris, if you've thought, and I've talked with other organizations who've pivoted a little bit of their language. Did that ever sort of occur? I'm sure it did, like of pivoting away from what your company's mission is. Because I know some who have and some who haven't. And like an organization here in Boston, Hack Diversity, just shut down because they didn't want to compromise what they were all about. Mm-hmm. And then just for you, Jeff, second question is, the first 100 days of the administration was kind of that big wave. Do we feel like there's more waves of even more restrictive policies coming, or is that, like you talked about, called it a shock and awe in the beginning, and maybe it will wane as time goes on? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I changed language. The mission did not change itself. For me, it's like the over-explaining. We're on my website. I had our mission statement. And now I'm explaining more like the reason it's so important to want to hire Black tech talent and, people outside of who's predominantly in your workplace is because, there's the innovation and, you get more revenue. Like I'm explaining all these things so that unfortunately, companies feel more comfortable or safe working with me because they can take this explanation to their leadership. Like, see, I don't know. But, and then there was another part of your question. I can't remember what it was. Did you? Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is the answer. I mean, I want to live in a world where it calms down. Like that's my hope. But I'm a lawyer, so I'm cynical by nature, so I'm nervous that that's not going to be the case. I mean, I think that what we're learning about the administration is shoot it all out, see what sticks, and then it tries to plug the holes that result from court decisions or something else. And we have a, I'm not going to editorialize too much, but we have a Supreme Court that is not helping. Is that right? Editorialized completely.
Hi, thank you so much for coming today. This has been really, really interesting and helpful. My name is Jackie. I work with a software consultancy that we are looking to work with client companies that are looking for software to be built, and we specialize in early stage startups. And we're hoping to work with client companies that share our values, which include DEI. So if everyone is getting really quiet about that particular value, do you have any advice for kind of finding, I guess, other people who care about this stuff, who maybe can't say that in those words, and kind of find that common ground and connect with those companies? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can start. I think that there's the cool thing about living in a space like Boston is it's so small, so it's very easy to find the right people that you need. Sometimes it feels like a needle in a haystack, but I think that now more than ever within like the past year, I've seen so many like groups come up. Like A to C is literally for underrepresented tech founders, and it's literally a community built based on like just events that they're providing and different resources they're providing, and they do a really good job at like partnering with other folks that are in the startup ecosystem. So it's a really good way. I think the biggest thing that I'm about to say is just partnerships, like people partnering with people and like finding those resource groups that are literally meant to serve the underrepresented founders. And I think that like now there's been such a like influx of it, and I think it's a really good thing. La Familia Foundation is a really good one too, where it's for like Latinx startup founders that are trying to break into, as well as VC and like investing. I think that finding those like niche groups there, they're not gonna compromise who they are to make themselves more digestible. So I think trying to find ways to partner with them, have these types of conversations, even like just show up to their events, whether it's a happy hour or like a roundtable talk, I think benefits you a lot in the long run as a company, because it exposes you to all the folks that you're trying to not only hire, retain, but just like build community with. Like you're not going to be able to build community if you're only looking for it at your job. So that would be like my piece of advice.
Great.
All right. A huge thank you to our speakers. We have a lot more in store for both today and the rest of the week. There are a lot of different side events happening throughout the city tonight, so you can definitely check them out using the link in Slack channel. We also, if you are interested, what's currently happening right now on the very first floor is a Massachusetts Climate Tech Studio finale showcase. And if you go down, you'll be able to make the second half of that. Otherwise, you are welcome to stay here, mingle. This is the last event of this room today, so chance to network and stuff. If you are virtual, of course, you can go to, choose next session on your schedule, though I think this will also be last one of the day. Lastly, Kevin Tai from 3 Circle Studio is our official photographer. You can grab him for a photo, and you'll get a personalized Startup Boston Weekend photo album to look back on all year. To download that album, you can just scan the QR code I have it right here. Otherwise, once again, thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good job. Thank you. Don't all rush out at once.